right, my Renowned fam, welcome back to the Renowned Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Morris, and as always, I am so thankful that y'all are here on this wonderful, whatever day it is that you're listening to it. It drops on Wednesdays. If you're not listening to it on Wednesdays when it drops, shame on you. Do better. Anyway, my name is Stephen Morris. I am your host, and I am so thankful y'all are here, like I said. And, it's funny. I got my good friend, Tiffany uh, uh, Odutoye. Did I nail it?
You nailed it.
I had to cheat. I had to look at the little thing you gave me. So I have Tiffany-O here. And we're gonna be having a conversation. It's just straight up off the cuff, and we're gonna have some fun. So how you doing, Tiffany? Go ahead and introduce yourself real quick for the audience. Tell them who you are and what you got going on.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Tiffany-O. You did the hard part with the Odutoye. And I am one of the newest members of the Career Winner Circle. So you and I are on the same team doing coaching. I'm really excited about that. I try to say that I'm a business visionary. Like I really like helping people come up with good ideas and fleshing out their ideas from start to finish so they end with an action plan. I'm passionate about tech, but especially a passion about women and their leadership journey, what they need, how they need to be served, how did they get where they got, and then how does HR serve them to continue to move them through the leadership paradigm so that they have a seat at the table. Really excited to be here with you today and can't wait for us to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, we don't say the HR word. That's a bad word. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's funny because HR has such a negative what's I don't know, you say HR and people just cringe because no one likes HR, but HR is so important to every organization. And it's so sad that it's such a thankless job.
It's interesting. A lot of, if we think about how organizations are formed, how they're designed, changes that happen, usually people do think about HR as the place you go when you have a problem. But HR is like the starting place for like all good ideas, right? So you have this idea, how are you going to move it through? It's all about the people. And so their job is to make sure the people component of ideas gets mobilized, operationalized, and at the end of the day, everybody's where they're supposed to be and people are happy. Organizational design happens in HR. Equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging happens in HR. Leadership development plans start in HR. I mean, like onboarding, offboarding, all happens in HR. So it is it's a very, very needed piece of the organization. Unseen, sometimes thankless, but it's a part that we need.
How can we do better, because I know from a lot of HR directors that I've spoken to, they've been like, yeah, I don't even get a seat at the table. Like I do all of this, basically running the entire organization, like you said, because nothing happens without HR. But they're like, I do all of this, and I still don't get a seat at the executive table.
Hmm.
So that's a problem. The a common problem that I find. Others are just HR is solely responsible for handling the bad things that happen, or it's like, we don't want to do this, but HR says we have to type things. I mean, do you have you in your experience, have you ever had any practice that you can share to help kind of dissolve that negative connotation when it comes to HR?
You know, it's interesting you asked that question. I had the rare and honorable privilege of being in a healthcare institution, 55,000 employees, global organization,
Wow.
and our leader, our key leader of HR was a woman with vision. Was, and is very savvy. And when I got invited to the table, it was to figure out how HR can have a stronger voice through large transformational change happening throughout the healthcare system. And so, what was really interesting is we created an HR PMO, program management office. And I ran a steer co for HR. HR had its own thing. We brought together change, we brought together the program or project management piece, and we brought together the strategic communications piece. And our Steerco mobilized itself, and we brought together all the key leaders of HR. And we plugged it in to large scale organizational change that was happening inside the institution, someplace else. So all the stuff that's impacting the doctors, stuff that's impacting you know, talent acquisition, things that were impacting employees at all levels, from the bedside to the boardroom. Now, because we mobilized it that way, we got invited. We had a seat at the table when all the presidents of the hospitals got together for these executive debriefing sessions. We had a big voice. And part of that was being able to talk about the impacts to implementation. So if you have a 32 to $100 million project and you need it to be successful, and there are people impacts, and HR has been behind the scenes systematically organizing those impacts and ensuring that that program stays on track, because at the end of the day, it's people that derail the programs, right? Whether or not they implement and execute the way they need to, or whether or not you prepared your stakeholder engagement appropriately. So because we had sort of this lean, smooth operational thing going on, and we had a steer code that was designed to plug into the rest of what was happening, our key HR leaders had seats at the table, and they continued to be informed, and we were able to, really avert some some derailers of a large scale transformation. And that's the power, I believe, of HR. When you can create a PMO, most organizations don't have one, but when you have this sort of integrated ecosystem that's plugged into large scale transformation, now HR is a more strategic partner. It's the group that's thinking ahead. They're out front leading the charge, and they're also coaching some of those key leaders behind the scenes when there are issues that happen with people that they hadn't planned for. So we're out there in front. So I think that was the first time I saw HR take on a different role in an organization. But again, it was very strategic, tied into a large organizational transformation, tied to outcomes, vision, mission, and purpose. And I think when HR can do that, they have a larger seat and a bigger voice.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you don't ever this I mean, I have heard like kind of vague stories, I guess you could say, of something similar to that, but that's not something you hear every day, of HR taking on a responsibility like that. And I think that's cool because that shows several things about that organization. It sounds like a pretty awesome organization, just from that brief story. Because in order for HR to do something like that, this organization has to understand that the political slash red tape that we cripple our HR departments with a lot of times, that unnecessary garbage. It sounded like that was pretty manageable, because otherwise you wouldn't have the time to do things, like take on this big overtaking. I actually kind of what I want to ask now, though, excuse me, is building this team. What were some of the things when you were putting together this team? Because team building is one of my big passions. And so I'm interested to know what your key identifiers for team members were, and what some key, like, nope, you're not going to fit in with our team, things were.
I wish that the answer to that question was simple. Honestly, this was a team I inherited. Now, the design and how we were going to work together was co-created. But the people, the key players, the roles, I walked into um a problem that was already sort of forming, storming. People were already in the room together. And it was a matter of, now that I'm in the lead seat, how do I engage each one, um, and make sure that they shine, their strengths shine, that when there is an area of expertise that's theirs, that they're front and center and that they own that, and that then they mobilize others in the organization, that they need to on a regular basis, and that they engage their stakeholders and then bring that back to us so that we can react and act quickly. So, in terms of building the team, my team was pretty much built for me when I got there. And now it was just a matter of establishing relationships, rapport, and figuring out how we work together. What does the dynamic look like? Do we move and shift together? When do we divide and conquer? And then when does the collective voice come together to lead change if we're identifying that there's a potential barrier to execution or implementation? And then how do we work together to make everyone else that's out there, yeah, hundreds of stakeholders for large scale implementations, how do you make sure that they all know who we are, who's on first, when we all come into the room, who's speaking first, so just really working on the team dynamic where people feel that they own their piece, they're the subject matter experts, I let them do that. And then when do we like need to team up together to get things done? So I wish that I had the privilege of picking, but to be perfectly honest, I had an amazing team. I couldn't have picked better people. And if I had to build a team all over again, I would pick those same people.
Oh, that's awesome. And so I misunderstood. I thought you put the team together. But I mean that's even better though, because 99.9% of the time when we get brought into these situations, we don't get to pick our team. Very rarely do you ever get to pick your team. Usually that's already done.
Yeah.
So
I think
oh,
the cool thing is though, you have people, you have a problem, but you get to, I think when you're in the lead seat, you get to design the ecosystem. How are we going to work together? What's our op model? And I think that is the piece, that I had control over. Who's the persona? Who's on first? What are we saying? Who's leading which parts of the initiative, moving those pieces. I think that's if you can control what your op model looks like, then that's great as well.
yeah, absolutely. And that was actually kind of what my question was going to be then. So you come in, you're a new face to this team. First of all, leading leaders is probably one of the most challenging tasks you're ever going to be faced with, because you have already personalities that are used to leading, and so that's the seat they're naturally going to try to do, and if you let them, they are going to try to lead you. And it's not intentional, it's not malice. It's just personality. Is it's what they're, that's their job. Their job is to lead. So leading leaders is definitely a challenge in its own right. Probably one of the hardest ones I've ever experienced in my leadership journey. Um, but so when you came into this team of a bunch of leaders coming together to implement change, which again, that's another super when you're trying to, especially, I think you said 55,000. That is a huge engine, right? So imagine, you're in a race car, and all of a sudden mid race you have to change the engine, right? That is what you're trying to do without losing the race. It's insane, right? So this is a big task she's talking about here. And so you come into this team, right? Um, I'm going to assume you didn't really know the people on the team. I could be wrong. It doesn't really matter. Um, what were the steps that you went through? Because one of the most destructive things people can do, especially in this situation, is come in and just put the iron fist down, the steel curtain, and this is how we're doing it. And yeah, blah, blah, blah. And that's going to instantly disengage everybody. I would say 99% of the people on the team, they're like, nope, not working with you. You're stupid. Um, Whether they say that or not, I don't know, but that's definitely going to be most of their thoughts. So, what were the steps you went through to avoid that trap?
Thanks for asking that question. for me, if anybody, if you know me, or if you know people who know me, I'm very relational. So most things for me are first and foremost about the relationship and about the rapport. The work will always be there. We'll catch up on that. But the connection, right, establishing that up front is always critical for me. So the first thing I did when I got there, I want to, the one-on-one, the meet and greets, put the face with the name, really get to know people. How do you like to work? You know, if you're working with, I'm a borderline extrovert, but could be introverted. So I kind of understand, both parts. If you work with someone, but when I'm in the thick of it, very like the driver. But if you're working with introverts and you need the best out of them, you need to understand that at the get-go. So what's understanding people's norms? What is the best way for us to engage? And I'll never forget, I had one colleague, absolutely amazing, phenomenal, but don't call her short notice, right? Which is in healthcare, everything's happening like right now. One of the things we figured out early on because of her personality was if you give her a warning that you're calling her and you need her, she will like shift and be available. And so as you get to know people, that's number one. Number one, get to know people, get to know them well, get to know them personally, right? It's not the business will come, but the person comes first. The next thing was humble inquiry. So when I began, working and leading and needing to do, you can't assume that you can't assume that you know. You have to be curious, right? And even though you're there to lead, you have to have respect for the fact that everybody else is a leader as well. It's just that both everybody can't steer the ship or else it would tip over. So somebody had to be chosen to steer the ship. It doesn't mean that the rest of the passengers aren't equally qualified, if not summa qualified, right? And so respecting each person for what they bring to the table and that your voice isn't the end all be all. Invite people to share their voice. And that was the other thing is, we set an agenda, but my belief was co-leading and co-creating was a better model. And so that was my approach was we are doing this together. So your voice is important, even if at the end of the day I have to make the decision or write the recommendation. It needs to be influenced by your thoughts, what you see, what you heard, and that including people's voice was the third thing. And then the next piece was drinking from the fire hose, right? So for me, I wanted to absorb everything that happened before I got there. That means that I need to know what happened. I need to see all the documentation. I need to understand you drink from the fire hose and you talk to people about the backstory about decisions as you see them. So before you change anything, I'd like to, can you help me understand how we got here? And there's usually a story and some logic and some reasons behind that. And then last thing is before I decide to do anything, make any adjustments, recommendations, or changes, you socialize that. Hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? What have you heard? Do you think this would be a good idea? What's a better way to do this? And so with that approach, I found that we got a lot done. We got it done quickly. And people seemed to be happy because they were heard, they were seen, and they felt like I cared. And so because you got to know people, you can honor where they are. And I can look at a person in the meeting and before the meeting starts and figure out that something's not right. Right. And then later on, we can have an offline conversation about that. And that makes people feel that someone cares. And I think people play full out when they believe you really care about them.
Yeah, I love everything you said. And um I'm going to sum it all up in one word, and that word is humility. You led with humility. You didn't lead with ego, you didn't lead with pride. You led with a humble approach that, like you said, made everybody heard. And the great thing about leading with humility is you can't fake it.
Mm,
You have to be genuine when you lead with humility. And when you lead from a genuine place, it it instantly sets everybody's walls a couple of pegs down, because we all have walls, we all have those barriers, right? But when people feel that genuine humility that you bring to the table, it's like, oh, those walls just come down a little bit further, and that already puts you a step ahead, being the new person on the team, the new face, because you're already tearing down walls. And that, as a leader, that's one of our most important jobs, right? We got to tear down the barriers blocking, especially whenever it's coming to changing a giant engine in the machine. We have to tear down those barriers. So I love that. And one of the examples I thought of is, like you had mentioned earlier, you and I both coach for a career winners circle, led by Tammy Alvarez, who has been on my podcast multiple times. So the audience all knows her. But one of the amazing things that Tammy does, she knows me so well that we can be sitting on a Zoom call. We don't even have to be in person, and she can just look at my face and be like, something's not sitting right with you, right, Stephen? Or you have something to say, right, Stephen? And she calls me out all the time. I may not even be planning on saying something, but she recognizes my facial expression or my body language, and she can instantly tell that I have something to say or something's not sitting well with me. And whatever decision it is she's mulling around. And so that just is a great example of what you're talking about, and how important it is to know the people we're leading, so that we can see those things. And when we feel, for me, being led by Tammy, it makes me feel empowered. It makes me feel important.
Mm,
It makes me feel like my opinion matters. And so, and I'm sure there are many other things, but I'm just trying to sum it up here. But it makes me feel like I am the team. And that's the most important part of when you're a member of a team, is feeling that way.
I agree. I agree. And it's I don't know how I know what I've experienced. And through the years, some of the leaders that I admire the most, that I played full out for, were the ones that said, "Hey, Tiff, let's go grab a coffee. Tiff, would you like to have lunch? Tiff, I want you to meet some of my friends that that are in my inner circle. Would you come to brunch with us during the workday?" It was the that kind of connection that made me feel like this isn't just, I mean, work. We spend, like a third of our waking hours at work with the people at work. And at the end of the day, uh, they have an impact on us. And I want the impact that I have on others to be like the impact I experienced firsthand. And I'll never forget, from the time I first started as a teenager at SmithKline Beecham Pharmaceuticals. I went through their business experience program. My leaders were those kinds of people. And then through the years, been very, very blessed with leaders that were just down to earth, but serious about what they did for work. And that's the kind of connection that is important to me, creates happiness in the workplace. And it's one that I'm committed to inspiring other leaders to embrace. But, on my teams, with the people that I'm innovating with, that's the person that, that's the skin that I want to remain in always.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, it's funny, Tiffany. Um, you bring up brunch, lunch. I just made a short, or released a short video on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Don't do TikTok because I hate TikTok. But I just released a short video, and it's about that. It's, people ask me all the time, what's your favorite team building exercise? Simple. Break bread, man. Just go have lunch. Don't talk about work. Don't talk about the office. Don't talk about, the gossip or whatever. Just go have lunch. Talk to people. How you doing? How's the kids? How's the wife? How's the husband? How's the parents? The dog? Whatever. How was your vacation? Like, just talk. You do that at least once a month for a year, you're going to be amazed at the camaraderie that's in that team. And you're going to find, even if they're kind of hesitant to it at first, by the end of the year, they're going to look forward to it, because that's time when you get to just sit with people, chill, and have a good time. Which, like I said at the beginning before we started recording, life's too short to hate what you do.
You
If
gotta,
if if
yeah.
I'm spending, like you said, a third of my waking time with somebody, I want to enjoy it. So let's have fun. Go break bread, build that camaraderie, and just have a good lunch with your team.
You know, I don't know if you would agree, but what you said was pretty powerful and pretty profound about how, as time goes by, the camaraderie and the team dynamics shift. But we're living in a time where people need people more than ever, and there's stuff happening in people's lives. And as before we went through the pandemic, you know, when you start looking at mental health and wellness and well-being, there were statistics. And as we moved through that and we're coming out, we're still trying to piece ourselves back together. And yet we've been asked to continue to perform in the workplace or in our businesses the same, if not more, right? Depending on changes the business has made in terms of headcount. But our people that we work with, whether they tell us or not, everybody's putting themselves back together. And so, as leaders, it's important for us to recognize that it's an unspoken sometimes. We don't know what people are taking to be able to keep themselves together in the workplace. But I try to be very conscious of the fact that the world that we live in affects people. It affects, I mean, depending on, if they've got family and friends in other countries where the world is more connected now because of technology. We see so much. Our family and friends are abroad. They're all over the world. They're not right here in the United States with us. And what happens to them over there affects us, right? Our children, bullying in school, cyberbullying, all this stuff affects parents, and parents come to work every day. Mates are having challenges. And so as I think about, like, these are real people with real problems, and I'm asking them to do a job for me or with me, I have to be respectful of what's happening and honor what's happening in people's lives and support that too. I think that's important for a leader. It can't just be about your bottom line results. It has to be also about the person that's getting you those results.
Yeah, I get in quite a few arguments with the older generation of leaders who are still of the mindset of work is, business is business and personal is personal. They don't intermix, which I understand. That's how we've done things for hundreds of years. But there's a problem. All right. Life moves a million miles an hour faster than it did 100 years ago. In the 1950s, sure, you could operate that way because you weren't operating a million miles an hour. You weren't working from the time you woke up to the time you went to bed. Everything's changed, like you said. We're more connected now than we've ever been. We have news instantly the second it happens. We can't operate, we can't function that way anymore. One of my favorite stories to share is I had this team member. She was my superstar. She was my rock. Anytime I needed anything done, I went to her because I knew I could count on her 24/7, 365. And I'll be honest, yeah, sure, I abused her a little bit, like, but I mean, she never complained. She always did it. She was happy to. She loved. She took honor in the fact that she was my number one, right? And we all have that person. And then all of a sudden, one day, she just stopped showing up.
Hmm.
Just boom, and she was there physically, but not mentally. And I did not understand why. And I did everything I could to try to figure it out. Long story short, a couple of months after all this happened, and we've gone through just a bad several couple of months, I find out through the gossip chain that her husband of 20 or 30 years, I don't remember exactly how long now, had an affair. They were going through a really nasty divorce. And she just was in a very bad place. And it broke me, Tiffany. It broke me in half, literally, because I thought we were friends, right? Yes, I'm her boss. Yes, there's that, but still I considered her my friend, right? And I could not believe she did not come to me with this
Mm,
and tell me what was going on. And I realized I had failed her. I did not create I created a super competitive environment, which isn't a bad thing. But in doing that, I didn't create a safe place where they could be emotional as well.
mm,
Right. And so she did not feel safe coming to me with this problem. She thought my response was going to be suck it up, buttercup, press on.
mm.
Which of course it wouldn't be. Like I totally can relate. Like I feel that, like, you know, but I realized that I had failed her, and we went through a very bad time that could have been avoided had I created that space. And more importantly, I could have given her what she needed willingly. I would have been happy to help her through that process. Um, I know some people that could have maybe coached her through that because they had gone through that before as well. I could have introduced her to some people that could have helped coach her. I could have given her the time she needed. I could have given her the FMLA, whatever the case is. I could have worked with her. We could have got through this, and it didn't have to go the way it went. It happened because I had failed as a leader. And so I totally agree. We cannot operate anymore with this personal is personal, business is business, because in my story, her personal was affecting her business. There's no way around that. If your mom dies and you're having to struggle with those emotions, that's going to affect you, and you can't just shut it off when you clock in.
It's I want to say two things to you, and one is I really admire your look back about who you were and how much you've grown, because now you know better, you do better. And you use that as an opportunity to be a catalyst for other leaders now moving forward. And the second thing is, I was recently in a doctor's office, and the woman who was doing my EKG had just lost her son. Now, how is it? Here I'm in my hospital gown, and we're chit-chatting, but she opened up enough. She cried on my shoulders. I held her in my arms, and she cried on my shoulders as she talked about her 20-year-old son who had just been gunned down and how her young son witnessed it. Now, these are people in the workplace. I don't work there, but other physicians do. Other people are in that same space with her every day. And this is what I'm talking about. People, they've got stuff, going on. And by the time we were done, she was able to pull herself together and get back to work, but she needed someone in that moment to be vulnerable with. And I think the more leaders can recognize that and then give people the safety, as you mentioned, to be vulnerable and not label them after we've seen their vulnerabilities, not label them, but support and encourage, and tell them, hey, if you need a moment, take a moment. I got you. And I think the more that we do that, people will be able to get through some of these very, very difficult things happening in their life, and they'll be able to continue to perform, and they will play full out for us. But we've got to recognize the human side um, in the workplace. It's critical now more than ever.
What you said that I absolutely love was not labeling people, and I hate labels. I think they're the dumbest thing. Red, white, black, or blue, you're a human being, don't care. Christian, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, you're a human being, don't care. And we may not agree on everything. That's fine. I don't care. But we don't need to label each other. You're a human being. I'm a human being. You're a woman. I'm a man. Just that's a fact of life, right? We don't need labels for that. You're African American. I'm white. That's a fact of life. Can't control it. You can't control it. We don't need labels for it. I've struggled with mental health. I don't know if you have. That's fine. That's a fact of life. We're both human beings. I don't need you to label me for it. I don't need to label you for it. These labels that society thinks we need to have on ourselves is absolutely, in my opinion, and I don't mean to be political or anything, but in my opinion, these labels are absolutely 100% destructive because it's removing us from being human beings. If we remove ourselves from being human beings, we remove ourselves from being vulnerable and allowing others to be vulnerable with us. I
Mm.
have no doubt in my mind in your story that woman needed you in that moment. And thank God you were there for her, because who knows what would have happened had you not been, right? But if there had been labels, right? Because and it's human nature, I think, for us to try to label everything, but we got to fight it. Because when you were telling the story, I'm like, my first thought was, that's pretty unprofessional. But then it was like, wait a minute. We were just talking. I was just talking about this. And it's like, no, she needed that moment. And you just happened to be the empathetic, caring person that happened to find her when she needed you. So I 100% agree. And I think I love the fact you brought up the label thing, because especially as leaders, we cannot be putting labels on people.
Thank you for saying that. And I want to take that a step further too, and just pivot that a little bit. I had a woman, I was hiring for an assistant, and I got a resume, a woman. This goes to the story of labor. You'll see where I'm going with this and why it's important. But woman applied for the job, and I was like, oh, she is overqualified was the label, right? And I looked and I said, oh, but this is a clinical environment. Maybe I can help her bridge the gap. So I took the interview, and I was thinking, when I interviewed her, what I needed, I could tell that she didn't have everything I needed because she was qualified to do something else. And I took the interview, and she said to me, now here's her humility. She says, she called me Miss Tiffany. I was like, oh my goodness. She said, I promise you. She said, I have two little girls, and I used to be a leader at X, Y, and Z, and they downsized, and I just need a job to take care of my children. I promise I will stay with you until I find what I'm looking for, but I will do a good job, and I will learn whatever you need me to learn. I will be there for you, Miss Tiffany. Please just hire me. And I looked at her resume again, and I said, and remove the label and see the person and the potential. And I said, okay, you got the job. I hired her. She came in, she worked hard. And I said to myself, okay, now I need to create a pathway for her, because, she's going to do what I need to do, what I need her to do. But I, this is someone who needs a pathway, a bridge for her. So I introduced her to a key leader who met her and fell in love with her, and introduced her to several other leaders. And she ended up getting hired as the assistant director for one of the divisions in the healthcare system. But I say all that to say that as leaders, it's important for us now in this age that we live in, to meet people where they are and to create bridges for people, right? As we start thinking about building our teams, what she had was integrity, honesty, and work ethic and drive. The fact that she had a master's and something else, she was smart too. So I would be foolish not to bring a smart person who's willing to figure out whatever it is they need to figure out. I would just need a little bit of patience, but also I needed to recognize the potential and build a bridge. And I think as we're starting to build, as we think about building high performance teams, and as we start thinking about succession planning, we have to start thinking about in organizational sustainability. It's important for us to remove the labels that are traditionally there: overqualified, underperforming, whatever that is, whatever we think we see, and think about potential. And I think as we do that, we'll be able to plug our organizations and get them pivoted and positioned for success in the future with the people that have the right stuff, right? Not just the right school on their resume, but the right stuff inside that will help our organizations to grow.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten an opportunity just because someone liked me, right? I wasn't qualified, but they're like, you know what? I think you, like you said, you have the mentality, you have the work ethic, you have the drive, and I like you. I think I can teach you everything else, and I can't tell that that has happened so many times. Um, but I think the most important thing you said there is you got to go to where people are at. And I think of, you know, my sales coach when I started my company, one of the most amazing salesmen I've ever seen in my life. He come he didn't like give me all of his knowledge and expect me just to shoot up to where he was. No, he came down to where I was at and then slowly lifted me up to try to get me to his level. And that's what leaders' jobs are. Like ultimately, our job as a leader isn't to drive the bottom line. Yes, that's part of the job, but that's not our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal as leaders, that driving the bottom line, that's the manager in you. That's what you manage. The leader in you goes down to where people are at, you lift them up to your level, or you teach them and to get to your level so that you create a bunch of people that are capable of leading just like you, if not better, hopefully better than you're able to do it. And all like that's my passion. Ultimately, I want to create a bunch of people that can go out in the world and see what I see and do it so much better than me. And honestly, Tiffany, I think that's how we change the world.
Yes. One person at a time.
It's a slow process, but I
And if
mean,
we're if we if you're blessed to be a leader and you're in a space where you can influence a culture it's you get to do it more than one person at a time. If you're in a leader in a space with other people and you have some of these mindsets and behaviors that you just mentioned, Stephen, you can make major difference on a lot of people's lives at one time just by modeling some of these things that you just mentioned.
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we forget that because we're so hyper focused on driving that manager side, right? And one of the things that always frustrates me, did I say that right? Frustrate? Yeah. One of the things that frustrates me is that we use manager and leaders simon or synonymously.
Hmm.
Like they mean the same thing, but they actually, in my definition, I guess they would be two completely different things. A manager, like I said, drives the bottom line. A manager checks the boxes and fills out the reports. The leader, though, the leader is the people, and
Mm.
that's the leader's sole job is the people, building those relationships, like you said, bridging those gaps, being that change agent if that's what's needed. That's what the leader's job is, and I love the fact you brought that up. So we're almost out of time. So I want to you shared a story with me before we started recording. And if you would, you don't have to use her name if you don't want to, but I would love for you to shout out your aunt, I believe, who is 70 some years old and she's about to get old. She'll have, by the time this comes out, she'll have already got it. But I want to give her a shout out because I love people that are getting rewarded for doing great work in their community. So go ahead and shout her out for me.
Oh my goodness. So Dr. Carol Simmons in Philadelphia, she runs a nonprofit. She's 78 years old and has not relinquished her head of the nonprofit seat. She's continued to do community work in Philadelphia with youths, with prison inmates, coming back to work. And now she's focused in her later years on, get this, uh, sustainability, environmental sustainability. So she's created like these urban gardens and she's created this whole infrastructure inside the inner city with farmers, which is really an interesting thing. But anyway, she's been given an award at City Hall on March the 22nd, and she always gets these community like awards, but she's going to be given this award for her community development work at the beautiful young age of 78, and our family couldn't be prouder. And she goes by Doc. So thank you so much for thinking of her.
Yeah, absolutely. And the main reason, if there's an ulterior motive to bring it up, is because when you were describing her to me before we started recording, I was like, man, that sounds exactly what a leader is, right? She's a change agent. She sees a problem rather than complain about it. She fixes it, right? I have a very firm belief. If you see a problem and you complain about the problem, you're a part of the problem. If you see a problem and try to come up with a solution to the problem, obviously you become a part of the solution. And I love the fact that she's just the prime example of what we're talking about here today, of what a leader actually is. And I love the fact that she's 78 years old and she doesn't have an excuse. She could sit down and say, you know what, I'm too old to do this crap. Totally. She has the right. She's earned it by now. She's a doctor. She's done it for years. Like, tons of reasons why she could sit back and say, you know what, I'm done. But she doesn't, right? There's no excuse. There's just the next problem and the next solution. And that is what leaders do. And I love the example. So make sure when you see her on the 22nd, you tell her that Stephen is very proud of her and very appreciative. Even though I don't live in Philadelphia, not my favorite place in the world, I got to be honest. But
You just haven't had the right cheesesteak, water ice, or soft pretzel yet.
oh shoot, cheesesteak. I can't remember the name of the place I went. It was where everybody told me to go, and it was amazing. It was amazing. Best cheesesteak I've ever had in my life. But I still, it's the cheesesteak isn't enough to keep me in Philly. I'm sorry. There's amazing food all over the world, and I would much rather have a shepherd's pie in Dublin uh than a cheesesteak in Philly. But I digress. Anyway, but no, make sure I'm super proud of your aunt, and we need more people like her in the world. And so I commend her. I commend you for your commitment as well to try to drive this change, try to educate people and get them to the level they need to be.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege being here with you and just having this chat, this fireside chat with you, Stephen. It's been great. Thank you.
Absolutely. I told you it was going to be easy, right? So anyway, before we bounce though, Tiffany, go ahead and tell everybody how they can find you, get a hold of you, check out what you got going on, and maybe schedule a call with you if they need you.
Oh, awesome, awesome. So you can find me at virtualpartner.biz. That's virtualpartner.biz. On LinkedIn, you can find me Tiffany-O or Virtual Partner. So that's my handle. And of course, if you're looking at the screenshot here, my background, it has my phone number, it has where you can find me on X and how you can send me an email. Please get in touch, schedule a quick chat, and I'd love to connect with you. And lastly, if you happen to know a woman who has crossed the bridge, climbed the corporate ladder, or someone sent the elevator back down for her, please drop me a message. I'd like to get in touch with her. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, y'all know the deal. I will have all of her links and everything in the show notes or description down below. So make sure you scroll on down, give her tons and tons and tons of love. And of course, don't forget, if you're looking for some coaching, you can also find her at careerwinnercircle.com and schedule a call through it that way as well. I'll also have the link for that down below. And once you're done doing all that, giving Tiffany all the love, head over to renownedleadership.com. Come give me tons and tons and tons of love because I need it. Tiffany, she's got plenty. I need the most. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. She definitely deserves all the love. But anyway, so I warned you, Tiffany, before we even started that I had a question.
Mm,
And I wasn't going to tell you what it was.
mm.
And most people, you should feel honored because most people don't even get that warning. So the question is, what does it mean to you to lead like a champion?
That's interesting.
Take your time.
Well, I think I'm just going to go back to our recent Super Bowl, right? And just watching some of the games, the MVP, I think these are the winners, the champs. These are the ones that inspire others. They're not necessarily, they play full out, they take it for the team, they bring it home, but they inspire others to greatness. And I believe that's what leading with it like a champ should really be about.
So you are the first person in the history of this podcast that actually took that back to a sports reference. And I really appreciate it, especially knowing you're not a huge sports fan. So I love that you actually turned it into a sports reference, because I'm a diehard sports fan. So that is amazing. And that's actually where it comes from. But no, that is super awesome. And you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. So, Tiffany, thank you so much for coming here. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you a little bit better, and actually just getting to have a chat with you, see where your beliefs lie, see what you're all about. It's been a pleasure and a ton of fun.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Likewise.
All right, everybody. So that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of the Renowned Leadership Podcast. I will see you all next week, same bad time, same bad channel. And in the meantime, never forget, everybody, lead like a champion. Goodbye.